Hello, and welcome to Playing With Inference, a podcast where we talk about the intersection of generative AI and games. Today, we're going to talk about how generative AI and machine learning apply to the art pipeline. Specifically, we're going to talk about 3D animation and what we can do with generative AI and machine learning in that space.
And joining us to help us in that conversation is Viren, the CEO and co-founder of Uthana, a generative 3D character animation startup targeting games. Welcome, Viren.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Awesome. Same. One of my dreams is to get animations generated in real time.
Jumping right at it.
You know what? I'm not going to hold back. How long do I have to wait for me to tell my creature that on the game we're building dance and it's actually going to do some crazy dance?
Yeah. What's surprising is it's not that far away. I asked the same question 2.5 years ago, 3 years ago, when we were coming up with this company. We're like, that seems like an obvious future. It's going to happen, but we didn't know when. At the time, I was like, it's probably like 7 to 10 years. And as it turns out, it's probably more like 3 to 5 from back then, which means we're probably like a year away or within a year of seeing the beginnings of that, which is kind of crazy. And I think then there's all these questions around inference time and integration and application that we can uncover. But if there's one thing that I want folks to take away from that question, it's things are happening way faster than they're happening. And that can be both exciting or scary, depending on where you're sitting.
A lot of questions, but let's start with, since you mentioned you've been on this journey for 2-3 years, why don't we make sure that everyone understands what you've been working on so far and whether you have real-time on-demand animation or not. What's the current state of affairs?
Yeah, so just to backtrack, like 3 years ago, I was actually working on a different company in Philanthropy. 2.5 years ago, I started thinking about the next thing. Talked to my brother, who comes from the games industry and Call of Duty specifically, about what can we build? And we were not even thinking about games or animation. We were just thinking about all ideas. And came back to that area of his expertise, which we thought was exciting and fun. My background from ad tech, and which is like, what? How does ad tech tie to animation? Well, it's two creative things on the screen that actually get put there very quickly in somewhat pseudo real time by the engine or the system in the ad tech sense. And it seems so simple, but it's so complex under the hood. And so that's kind of an analogy. We went on a journey of saying, if characters, animations can come to life in real time, and it's only a matter of time, what do you do between now and then? How do we get there? What we realized is we could start to build AI, ML technology that would bring characters to life in non-real time contexts. And over time, we just had a belief that compute models would get more powerful, would get faster, and then eventually you just be in that real time moment. Since about January of 2023, we started building this company. You can think of us specifically as understanding human motion. When we think about human motion, we can apply that motion to any character that's also got 2 arms and 2 legs. And we bring that character to life through these AI models by prompting them. Those prompts can be different things. The text, video, those prompts could be other motion. And that's at the heart of all the stuff we've been working on since Jan of 2023. To fast forward and go back to this question that Ramon asked, it's probably within a year. We have started to see the beginnings of this real-time model. And now we're thinking about how do we actually build a product around the technology that we know is possible.
And then again, just to make sure that I'm understanding, everyone listening is understanding. So right now, what we can do is we can take if I take a video of Ramon here doing a interesting dance, I can convert that into an actual animation using Uthana. I could also do a text description and get an animation, right?
That's right. The idea of going from video to animation has been around for years, much before our company existed. And so we thought about the other ways that we can actually get characters moving. I think text is a really natural one, especially with the advent of ChatGPT. In fact, when we were ideating the company was the same time when ChatGPT came out commercially, the fall of 2022. And so it only became logical to think, well, if I type in a prompt, I want to see the character move. Like, how can we make that possible? One of the core things we do is a textual understanding of movement. And that's important, not just for text animation and helping animators do their job today, but it's important for that future world where a character is going to come to life within the game that has to understand the environment around it. And the best way to do that is through textual context as opposed to anything else.
That was something that I'm curious, because you were talking about like understanding motion as a core challenge. And our motion is so interwoven with the physics and the environment in which we are, right? We do the things we do, except for crazy dancing. It depends on the physical environment we are in. How much does your work at Uthana depend on like, oh, we need to understand also the environment in which it is, or are we talking about more like primitives of motion that then the user can apply depending on the environment?
Yeah, so it's both, but I think we can break it into those two pieces. I think the way that you just described it was good, like primitives and then interactions, and we want those things to come together. So maybe just pose the question back to you guys for a second. How do we get a character to interact with the scene in a game today? Maybe one of you guys can describe that. Like, describe the scene, you describe how it happens. So character walks into a room, there's a weapon on the table, they need to grab that weapon and put it in their pack and go to the other side and take a drink of water before getting. How do we make that happen without AI?
Yeah, usually you're going to have some sort of control points or sockets or something that you're going to attach to that you can set up ahead of time. And so, yeah, there's a lot of different approaches for that, but it is going to be, you're going to have some things that's a little generic. So you don't have to do it for all types of weapons or things like that. You can attach these things easily. That's the basics of it. It can get pretty complicated depending on what type of system you're building.
Ramon, you want to ask me?
What I'm imagining is you have the skeleton of a character. Its location depends on the collisions with the surface mesh or the height map in the world in which it is. And then you have some sort of pathfinding as it walks towards a table. And then the motions that it goes through is animations that, at least in our case, that we have pre-baked, and then you're repeating or blending. The act of picking that sword is some blend of reaching out and grabbing and also walk. And all of these, presupposes that you have access to all of this environment, that you have placed the character in a proper way,
right?
That you have like animation primitives that blend well. And there's a lot of details like why is his food coming through the table? Lots of things can go wrong, but that's the basics of it.
We described such a simple scene. It's like, oh, that's going to take us a month. There's probably so much work, but I think we can break apart what you guys talked about in 3 pieces. There's the primitive animations, like I need a walk animation, I need a grab animation, regardless of where they are in world space. I just need something like looping, walk, and then grab. Then I need this like blending between animations. So how do I go from walk to grab? And then I need to interact with the scene and actually grab the right spot. So we just take those 3 levels. I think we want to graduate across those 3 levels in non-real time and then in real time. So in non-real time, it means like, can we synthesize a motion that's walking and can we synthesize a motion that's grabbing? So that's like step 1. And then separately, can we build something that makes the walk to grab seem realistic and fluid? So that's now this like editing concept of motion. And then third is like, okay, I want to grab the right spot. And now there's really like a question of, is that AI or animation engineering? And that's a place where we're still trying to uncover which part is animation engineering, which part is AI. Because when you blend them together, you get some really good results. But it's hard to untie that because right now I think it's a lot of animation.
One of the issues is it's not. This is where we get into tech art often, right? The line between animation and tech art can sometimes be a little blurry. Some folks consider riggers tech artists, for example. You'll find very similar techniques, but they can vary from studio or project just enough to be incompatible. Yes. Like what the socket names are or what the labels are. Often there's as much work to just make sure that you have a convention. And I will be honest, this is a part of my ignorance. Since I've usually worked with an animation or tech artist, I'm not aware, and I'd be interested to hear in the future, if there are conventions out there that are consistent enough. We have stuff for humanoid poses that we can do. But like for that broader animation system where it's like, we're going to have a chair thing or gun handle, right? My understanding is that usually you end up building a lot of these or tweaking them. I've seen people tweak them, but maybe there's enough conventions out there that that's not true anymore. And I just might be out of date.
Yeah, that's a good question. I'll be honest. I don't think I know the answer to the question of like, are there conventions that we should all be using or that are consistently, from what we've experienced, there's a lot of snowflakes out there. I think what you're describing is that last mile. And we think about that as like, we're going to cross that last mile when we get the last mile. And there's all this like pre-built, like how do we just get the animation created? How do we get the blend right? How do we get the semblance of the gun grab, even if it's not perfect? And then let's figure out if we can get all that, let the engineering team of the game figure out that last mile for now until AI can help out with it. But that last mile is hard.
I had never asked you this question because we've talked before about some of the stuff you're doing. Tell me if I'm wrong here. I'm just curious. Because one of the counterpoints to a lot of the generative AI art is simply, what is it good for? In a world where I have large marketplaces of animations, catalogs of animations, or other 3D models, there's a lot of catalogs out there you can get at a not unreasonable price. I could work with an art firm to generate those. We have things like Mixamo, right, for animations. One kind of devil's advocate point against some of these is if I already have almost all the animations I ever need because these libraries are out there, I can get them, then what does machine learning bring? And what I'm hearing, and I could be wrong, is that part of it is just being able to replicate the libraries isn't the point. It's what you can do once you have that technology that you're building up towards for real time or things like that. Those libraries, those catalogs could never do. They can't. That's not what's possible.
Yeah.
Am I making this up?
No, I think you're right. I mean, I think this is where you have to break that problem down into 3 parts: the synthesis, the editing, and then the real time in game. Because each of them have different problems and each of them need to be solved in different ways. So let's just take synthesis first. It's the simplest and it's also closest to your analogy of an asset pack.
Right.
I can go get an asset pack and get a Mixamo. What am I challenged with that? Well, and the challenge of Mixamo is typically that I'm on the Mixamo rig. What if my game's not the Mixamo rig? Okay, now I've got to do some retargeting or something.
You do retargeting.
If I go to an asset pack, how do I preview and pre-visualize what I'm going to get before I buy it? But there's not a good way. You buy it, then you see it, and you're like, it doesn't look. So we try to solve both problems with Uthana. It's like any character, any rig, upload it. It's going to work. If it doesn't work, just email us. We'll make it work. And now every animation is on your rig. So when you download, you're good to go. You can just plug and play.
That's a good point. Because with Mixamo, I'm not going to see that until after I bring it in and retarget it. Because they're going to be like some default rig ahead of time. So for what you got, I can upload my rig and I get that preview from the very beginning.
Exactly. And then let's talk about diversity. So Mixamo, you got a lot of pre-canned things. You got some adjustments. Pretty good. Asset pack, a lot of diversity, but it's across thousands of asset packs. Platform like Uthana, you go in, you can see through our library of 30,000 plus motions. Just type in a prompt or keywords and look through your library. If you don't see it, generate it. So I don't see that motion I need. Type in what you need, generate, and you get something close. Now, you might not get something that's perfect, but because you can output exactly in your character, now you're editing and you're tweaking and you're modifying the way you want to modify. So this is what we call the synthesizing layer. And by the way, if you want a cinematic performance, then record yourself doing something in a video, upload the video, and now you got that exact motion, right? So we try to hit all the buckets of creation to make it easy. That's synthesis. And before we jump to editing, I'll just pause because I think Ramon, you got a question about it.
When you go to Uthana and it's for a kid throwing a baseball, because there was no previous baseball throwing animations, does that get stored in the library for other people to use? Or is every time that a user generates an animation a new addition to the existing library, or is the existing library a curated library of animations?
Yeah, good question. Our existing library is all mocap data. You're going to get high quality stuff. If we generate, we don't actually then put that back in the library. Maybe if we decide it's a really good motion, we might borrow it, but no, that's not the intent. What you generate is in your private library within Uthana.
I see. Just out of curiosity.
Yeah. Synthesis. Now let's go to editing, because this is where it gets fun. When we think about editing, we think about the job of the animator and how do we accelerate that animator. In particular, it's what are the things that might be boring or tedious. A good example is stitching 2 motions together. Maybe I'm blending in 3 different angles of a run to the same idle pose. Or maybe I need to stitch together a particular attack that's in game to a cinematic so that I have that nice blend in my game, or the transition from gameplay to cinematic. This is something that's AI is really good at. We can train a model to forget certain frames of motion and learn how to infill them. Then we can say, okay, model, now I'm going to give you 2 different motions that you've never seen before, and I want you to infill between them. When the model gets really good at that, it creates seamless motion. That's not just interpolation, but it's new frames. That's what we call motion stitching. We're getting to a territory of frame creation that would have been on the burden of the animator. Not to say it's going to be perfect. It's still something you want to create, export, and then tweak and modify and get the perfect look that you want. We're trying to go to 90%. So that's just one example. Thoughts on that? And they're like, how do we analogize image or some other domain?
Yeah, actually, so I am of the camp that what all these models are really doing is really fancy interpolation, as in, they're overfit to the brim. It's not like they're generating brand new human knowledge. They store all of this information in their weights and then interpolate not in a naive way, but in a clever way in between the data set. I think this is true for LLMs.
2D
presume-
video, I think, is the same way. It's like if I have a first frame
Yeah.
and last frame of a 2D video, and it's like, well, where did I learn all that stuff? I learned it from the millions of videos I watched.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So for me, what is interesting is you're talking about interpolation and infilling. And it sounds to me that it's the perfect job for this type of models because infilling, interpolating is their core asset. So that's just my immediate reaction.
Totally. You know, I thought so too, like when we first started out 2 years ago, and it takes a long time to get here. I mean, we're just releasing this product this month. What's surprising, I think what we learned is that you can know in theory how these models should work, but in practice, making them work in a new domain or a new context is extremely just working with motion and not work with images is like quite hard.
So on that point, if you're working on a new domain, let's say I have an environment that has a different gravity, or trying to imagine like, I have no idea. I don't even have the conception of what is an animation that you wouldn't have been sampled in your data set. But I'm trying to imagine in this editing phase, what are existing or potential tools for enforcing extra constraints on that animation so that it fits the target environment and you can do it at this editing stage?
Yeah. So this is a great question. And before I answer, let's try to analogize. So what would be the analogy of what you just asked me in an image context?
In an image context, I am thinking, and this is dumb, I'm thinking like it's a human octopus, so there has to be 8 limbs.
Okay.
And you have to, like, I don't know, in this world, there's 8 limbs and 8 fingers. And you have to enforce some sort of structured output so that you check that each instance of a human has 8 limbs and 8 fingers. This is a super bad example, but also I'm not a image generator structured outputs person.
There is a question on motion. Your physics question is interesting because animation implies a physics that's happening. We don't run the physics usually. There are ways to add tech animation into the loop, but I don't think that's what you guys are doing. Gravity's an interesting point. Maybe if it's extra windy or something.
Yeah.
I would assume that's baked into the original animation idea or the original prompts.
Yeah. Let's take that 8-armed, 8-fingered.
You can also bring your own example. We don't have to use my bad example.
I'll change it a little bit because I wanted to use an example which an LLM might not be able to understand so easily. So let's assume that there was a unique texture. I'm an artist and I came up with a unique texture for human skin. And I'm really good at drawing that. And now I want an LM to be able to like create, or not LM, sorry, a diffusion model in image space to create like 100 more of those because my boss said I need 100 more of those images. And I'm like, that's going to take 3 months. What we would do there is we say, how could we use AI, assuming we want AI to help? We take the 10 images you've already done, have the model learn that style and create 100 more images in that same style. And the same thing can be done in animation. So if we take the example of a gravity that's different, maybe the art style is a character that the way it runs, it puts its arms really far out and it hangs in air a little longer than typical running, physically realistic. Well, if we have 10 examples of that, we can learn that style and then transfer that to an existing animation. So we can say, oh, I've got my whole walking animation set over here, but now I want the walking animation set to have a light step. And the animator's already provided me 10 examples of that. My job as a model is to create 100 more examples in different directions to help the animator do their job.
I guess one of the questions I have is there such a thing as a grammar of motion in that, like in LLMs, you can create structured outputs with certain guarantees because you can define a grammar and then sample in a way that obeys that grammar.
That's right.
And I'm curious, is that a thing in 3D animation?
I definitely think it is. I don't think we think about it as grammar, but we do think about it as how should a human body move in a realistic way and what is also unrealistic. When we do our model training, we go back to human motion capture. We get data from a motion capture studio, hired actors to walk around, run around, dance around, and we convert that from marker data to skeletal data. So you can imagine like 3D skeletons, skeletons in 3D space running around, dancing around. Each of those bones of those skeletons can be decomposed into math, rotations, translations, velocities. That decomposition is like the grammar of motion. Just the way you could decompose language into letters and words. We can decompose it into these mathematical terms. And then we can build it back up and say, okay, now that we understand that, like, what's the next frame of movement? Because we've seen the last 100,000 frames, so we can predict the next frame. And we're actually just predicting this language in this case in order to make that prediction.
I now have this whole list of topics I want to go through.
I also want to know, like, I say something that's dumb or call me out on it.
I want to go back a little to, we started on this journey earlier. You were saying, okay, where are you applying value in the animation pipeline? Like, what does investing in this platform give us that we don't already have today, that we didn't have before we applied this technology? We talked about synthesis, the actual creation of the animation frames. We talked a little bit of then, what was the word you used? Editing. So like the blending and other kind of manipulation.
Style transfer.
So before we move on to the next, like on editing, you talk about blending. Are there other areas of editing that you feel you've tackled or that you want to tackle that you think are particularly useful? Yeah. Let's go there. And then there was another layer beyond in the pipeline. I want to get to that.
So I think at editing, we talked about two things. We talked about stitching these things together and style transfer. Another one I would think about is if I have a motion, how can I start from there and then literally just edit that motion? Like, I need the character to swing harder. I need the character to jump less. I need the character to run faster. And the big distinction I make between synthesis and editing is editing, I'm starting from something. Motion. Right. That could be because I need to edit that specific motion, or I'm using it as a reference.
Okay, so this is great. This is one of the questions I had, is that one of the criticisms of some generative AI tools is, let's take art, for example, like 2D art, is that what I get is a PNG or a JPEG. I don't get a layered Photoshop file that I can easily edit, right? Or like an SVG that I might edit easily so that I can go in and be like, it's almost right, but I just want to tweak this one thing. Yeah. What I get is this baked asset. Consequently, some of the generative AI pipelines we have right now, you'll see they'll do many shots because I need to choose the one I want. It may be difficult to edit it later, or if I wanted it, I need to go through the whole pipeline again.
Right.
Now, granted, for some image generation, that's not complicated, but still, I may need to regenerate as opposed to edit the file. To your point, how are you trying to solve that problem? Are you making something that humans can edit? Can the system itself, if I have that and I'm like, yes, make them faster, or the body should be heavier or something, because instead of a thin person, it's a big, heavy, tall monster or humanoid still, right?
Yeah.
Is that something that goes through the pipeline again, or?
Yeah, I think there's like 2 or 3 things all compacted in that question. I'm going to try to tease them out. So the first is, let's level set on what we don't do.
Okay.
What we don't create characters, and we don't change the way the characters look. Our customers come to us with a character. And so if it's like, I want a taller character, it's like, then give me a taller character and I'll apply the motion. So what we do is we adjust the motion to apply to that character through the retargeting system.
Oh, that's right. Because I'm already uploading a mesh of some type.
You got to bring your own mesh. Or if you don't want to bring your own mesh, we're going to give you a motion on a character and then you have to retarget your system. Now, if the edit that you want is like, hey, that run wasn't exactly the way I wanted it, I want to modify that with text. Yes, that's an AI edit and it's specific about the motion. We haven't built that yet, but that's on our roadmap for sure. Because it's a natural way that people are thinking about, how to change emotion.
Okay, but doesn't that mean, and I don't know if this reveals too much about the system you're building, but the output is going to be what, like an FBX file or something like
FBX
that,
or GLB.
Okay. Doesn't that kind of mean that I could just take an FBX file? Like, once you have that, I could take kind of other humanoid FBX files that maybe, and be like, yeah, make this swing faster, even if it didn't come originally from.
Totally.
Like
all the outputs of everything in synthesis and editing that we've talked about so far, you can download a FBX, take into Blender, Maya, Unity, Unreal, and modify your heart's desire.
And then, in theory, bring back into the system.
And in theory, when we get there, bring it back. I mean, we haven't got there yet, but for our enterprise customers, eventually we want to get there for even our indie users, where it's like, I've got a file, I want to upload it, modify it, take it out. That's the dream. It's like, I don't need Blender anymore. I can just talk my way to the finished result.
I don't need Blender. That should be the title of the podcast.
I got to buy that domain right now. I'm checking to see if it's available.
Okay. So maybe we want to put a pin on this for later in the conversation, but understanding what you think will ultimately be replaced, both from technology and also from roles, to the degree they aren't, is something I'm curious about. Yeah. I know we keep trying to get further down this value pipeline.
No, this is good, because I think it's laying a foundation for the future, right? And I think that right now we're not replacing people. we're probably replacing workflows, and we're replacing tedium. To the extent that would have been solved by 3 people and now you can solve by 1, indirectly, yes, we are replacing a person. But in reality, from the customers we've talked to, what happens is not that they replace the person. What happens is they actually create more content, because AI in this domain essentially increases velocity. What you do with that velocity is really your choice as a developer. And typically it's about, now I can create this game faster and get it out to market and give myself a chance to have more runway. Or now I can create 3 NPCs that are unique instead of 1 NPC that's the same as all the others. So how you use the velocity is the context of AI.
So one of the things that I think, the people at Generative as well, that we are most interested in is like, what type of new games can we make? Obviously, you're more on the tool side, but I'm curious if you and your team have thought of game experiences that use generative motion as the core mechanic. I would love to hear if there's any of that type of efforts. And I have an idea that I'll tell you in a second, but I want to hear the Uthana version first.
So I think we're still not even getting to that 3rd tier of real time, but if we just take our text to motion and think about that as an API, and an API that can be called and responded to within 3 seconds, there are opportunities for games that empowers not just the developer looking to create more animation, but empowers the player in the game to ask for animation. So we have a partner building a platform for 3D content creation for teenagers, and they've integrated with us. The use case here is, can I put this in the hands of the teenage developers or teenage player, and while they're playing, they can actually type in like, now do a cartwheel, or now do a sprint, and the character starts to do it within 3 seconds of them typing. You couldn't do that before, and especially when you think about all the different things that person could prompt, you're not going to store 1,000 motions in your library, not just because of the cost, but also the memory. There's a couple of reasons why that wouldn't be possible without the idea of this text-to-motion API. Now, if we want to jump to that 3rd tier, right? So let's go to the 3rd tier. The 3rd tier is real-time animation. And in real-time animation, we're bringing that character to life in responsive ways to the environment, the dialogue, the character intent, whether that be AI-driven or player. It's really about taking those things we've already done in synthesis and in editing and making the inference time less than 0.2 seconds, ideally less than 0.1 seconds. Because at that moment, then every frame of animation on the screen is AI generated. When I turn left on the joystick or turn right, you'll actually see the character turn. All that is AI animated, not pre-canned controller. If you pair that with text, you start to get this agentic character on the screen.
At that point, though, we start to blend into 2 other domains, and I'm curious if you see them truly as separate or not. So one would be, again, more of a AI physics engine, or just a physics simulation side.
Yeah.
The other is what some people call full world model. These are very different. It's kind of more like Google VO3, right? Like there's animation that's happening in there, but my output is really this kind of like video, right?
Yeah.
Once again, in that kind of baked format. But what you guys are building is this kind of component to a larger system, right?
Right.
Can you talk about how close do you end up having to build something to get to real time? How close to video generation do you need to get? Are those really how do those 2 domains bump into each other, or do they not? The training data is very different, but the end effect can feel somewhat similar.
Yeah. So I think they're very different. The primary distinction is interactivity. So in a 2D video generation model, you typically are creating something and putting it out in the world, and you can recreate it. I can consume it, but I can't interact with that creation. In 3D, we're interacting with those creations through games, training, or some type of simulation. It's that interactivity that makes it distinctive from the 2D generation. That's a big, broad distinction. When we think about our technology, we actually don't think about how do you compete with VO3 or a Runway or those guys, because they're creating worlds and situations that are in some ways static. Whereas what we want to create is interactivity. So the editing and the synthesis we talked about already it's actually just like a step towards that interactivity, empowering the animator and then the game developer. But if we can actually get that interactivity into engine, then it becomes alive. And that's a critical part of the word engine, right? Like, we are not building the engine. We will build SDKs to then plug into engines. And the engine is ultimately going to bring alive many other parts, not just ours, like generative or created objects from generations, scene generation, AI gameplay, et cetera, et cetera.
What then? So we're leading to another area I've been thinking about. What do you think, not to limit the startup you're doing or anything else, but help understand some of the edges, even in the animation space? If I'm using your animations for a game, I might still need tech artists doing visual effects.
Yep.
Or some type of simulated cloth dynamics, right? If you work in this space, you often have the tech artists or the tech anim team collaborating, or you have other products working close together so that you can get the full thing. When someone outside of the space thinks of animation, like, well, the whole thing moved. Actually, there are a lot of parts
Exactly.
that went into that move.
Right?
There are a lot of things that happened there. And you're solving just one of those now.
That's right. Yeah.
So are you going to solve all of them, or how does that work?
Yeah. So the answer is definitely not. I think we'll solve more than just the one we're solving.
Okay.
Where we go, I think, is a open question. So, like, for example, well, let's just break down the parts first before we talk about where we're going. We see a scene in a game, we're walking through it, and you just said a great thing. You said VFX, you said cloth. Of course, we got the scene itself. We've got probably fog and lighting and objects. It's almost like if you went back 10 years ago, you could find a tech artist of some sort for every single one of these things. Every single one of these things now has an AI company or multiple AI companies trying to solve. All those AI companies are converging into the same place, like an engine that's going to have to plug these things in if they don't build it themselves. Maybe Unreal Engine in 20 years actually has all these things naturally, and we're just prompting our way to everything, which may happen. But in the near term, at least in the next 5 years, it's going to be different companies having built specific models that can come together in real time to bring the world to life.
It's a good point, because from that outside in, some folks are like, oh, it's animation. Like, I don't know, it's the stuff that moves. And it's like, well, there's a lot of parts here.
Right.
It may not be the same person or even the same team, depending on the department that you're working with or the size of the organization. How you go from animating, for example, cloth, the cape versus the actual run motion or their hair, right?
Face.
And then you may have where you want to, even more sophisticated. Sometimes you will take over some things because you've got some close cinematic where you want the hair to do something, and
right.
People will cheat to get it to look the way they want it to, particularly in a cinematic that's pre-rendered. There are a lot of parts is what I'm really coming to. I guess what I'm expecting here then, to your earlier point of maybe not replacing people, is it sounds to me like we're a long way from that. I'm going to type up big monster with all the animations and it just does all of it.
Yeah.
Like, this is still fairly technical to pull. They're not skilled to be able to pull all these things together and create a finished work.
Yes.
It sounds like the bottleneck moves, right? Like, you solve animation, but you still have all the other aspects that are ancillary or around it that become the new bottleneck.
And that bottleneck is going to be a function of quality and cost. Where things are already of good quality for low cost, maybe the AI is not going to solve that first. And it's like, where do you want the AI? You want it on the things that are like low quality but high cost, which I think on that spectrum, animation is probably more on that spectrum than, say, art. 2D art. The other question I think is interesting is, from which direction are we going to see the convergence? Are we going to see it in the AAA 3D games that plug in the 7 different AI things? Or are we going to see it from the very bottoms up, like vibe coding games today? And the vibe coding games start to slowly plug in the basics of these. So, for example, we could take our real-time system for locomotion and just say, okay, it's quite simple. It's like 3 styles, 3 speeds, and the character moves around in real time, and I'm going to give this mini SDK to a vibe coder, and they can plug in any one of their games. But if 6 other tool providers did the same thing, now that vibe coder has a lot of tools at their disposal to get it going. Or is it going to be like Uthana made the AI NPC? It does literally everything. It's amazing. And then there's 7 other companies that did 7 other amazing things. Can pull it all together. Which happens first? I don't know. We're going to see where
it feels to me that either vibe coders or indies are more likely to benefit, right? My hunch is that at AAA, you're still competing. It's an arms race of quality, whereas not that there isn't at the indie or vibe coding. Maybe vibe coding is a bit more of like you're doing for yourself or for the sake of it. In indie, you're putting most of your effort on the thing that you're really good at. Everything else just has to be good enough to put it in front of a user. So there is where a lot of the benefit comes, right? If you can just be able to use animations from Uthana and then grab like the meshes from Meshi, and I don't know, like every tool allows you to really be able to deploy this game that you've been working on. I feel like that's where the convergence is more likely to happen.
To take some of the words you just used and change them a little bit, I might say, like, in the vibe coding context, each of these tools is like letting a developer break through a ceiling. I couldn't do a 3D animation game before because
Yeah.
animation was hard. Oh, now I can do it. I couldn't do amazing generative scenes because I don't have the capacity. Okay, now I can do that. I'm breaking through the ceilings, and I'm going to see more innovation there. On the flip side, I think on the AAA side, it's almost like a accelerant where it's like GTA 6 is going to take 10 years, but in the future it'll take 2.
That's what I don't know, because it's not that games became more difficult to make. It's that the bar quality keeps growing and growing at that level.
Yeah.
That it's an arms race. Who can put the best looking, most impressive with the largest world type of competition?
Totally. I want to get your perspective on this. People say, look at Roblox as an example, and it's not about the quality. It's about finding your friends, having fun, and making a fun game. I always think, sure, that's important. But if we think Roblox is not trying to improve quality, we've got to be kidding ourselves, right? They're trying to get better. What do you guys think? Is it just about finding the fun, or is that quality bar matter? Because if that quality bar matters, then tools like ours are going to be very important to get to realism or high quality look and feel.
I would say finding the fun tends to always matter first. Quality tends to be a potential differentiator beyond that. We see the quality arms race happen in more established genres where the gameplay space has been well explored and quality is now a differentiator. For many years, the game industry was driven as much by hardware, like core capabilities. We only have so much memory that we can use in a certain console. We can only move so fast. And so there were types of games that you just could not make with Atari. They're just not possible.
Yeah.
No amount of programming hacking could create the amount of content. You couldn't hack a version of World of Warcraft on an old Atari, right? It just doesn't work. But we've gotten to the point where there is a large range of games for which not all games, many games for which those are not the primary constraint. And then we start to differentiate in other ways. I'll add to that there was a moment where, on this quality perspective, we were talking to one of our investors and advisors early on and thinking about our plan for what we were trying to do with Retail Mage and some of the other games we were thinking of and how we were going to apply the capital and the resources we had. Because Jam&T is a team of veteran game makers, we had a bias towards a certain quality bar we expected of ourselves compared to the games we had made in the past. We were actually challenged on that by our investor and couple advisors because their argument is that if we believed that we were breaking into a new genre, a new type of gameplay, then typically the quality bar is lower for those. So like the first VR games or the first, whatever games on a particular genre, or the first battle royale, for example, people play it because it's new, because of the gameplay. And then after that, you compete on quality. The argument was that if we felt too caught up in that quality bar, did that mean that we didn't believe in our gameplay enough? Like, was it truly novel? Or were we too anchored on our belief around that quality? It was an interesting point for us because I think we come to things just like, well, we know how to make this look great, so of course we're going to make it look great.
Right.
And maybe we didn't need to.
Yeah. No, I think
I agree with your investor advisor up to the point, because I think once a player has accepted the idea that they're going to give it a try, this is true. Like, it's an experience, so who cares if the quality is not the best? But in that prior step of the player choosing to give this a try, you're competing. It's very hard to really portray a new experience in 60 seconds or 30 seconds of a teaser. And you're still getting judged.
That's a whole other topic.
That's
But at
part
some
of the
point, we
arms
should
race,
talk about
right?
what are the wow moments for AI games. I do think there are games that we're making where we can generate behavior in real time that if we could also generate corresponding animation, that could be very, very interesting. There's tricks and you can fake it in a lot of different ways, but I do think that would open up something we've not had before. It's like all of these are pieces of a puzzle that you're describing. As they start to get assembled, suddenly there's new things we could do. Some of them are held back by making sure we have all those puzzle pieces.
Yeah. So if I flip it to my point of view from a tool provider, not a game creator, it's like I need to both tailor and market myself to folks like you, Aaron, that are looking for that and Ramon, to you too. They're looking to make a gameplay distinction using a novel technology like ours. But at the same time, there's a lot more people that are just trying to get by either through velocity or time savings, cost savings, and they want to use the tools just to do those things. And it's like, it's very interesting because I think I generally agree with your thoughts there. And I think the people that are going to push the boundaries are these innovators from a gameplay perspective. However, eventually that will get commoditized or become expected. And then that becomes just like, oh, you have to use Uthana for XYZ because how else are you get this thing done in an efficient and cost.
I want to make sure we talk also about introducing these tools into your experience in introducing AI tools into studios. Now, animation, I don't know if animation gets a special use case. The only reason I say that, and when your thought is, arguably, there have been applications of machine learning and a lot of procedural, very advanced technology in animation. Animation is a field that has had a lot of procedural work, like the claw simulations I just mentioned. Machine learning has been applied in various aspects to animation. So I also kind of wonder, maybe it's easier for people to accept this as part of their tool chain because it's an area of the pipeline that is very technically advanced. So what are you finding when you're talking to people, and how is this changing the workflows?
Yeah, I think it depends on where the quality bar is for that particular user. I'll go back to the synthesis and editing parts of our technology because that's essentially what I've had most experience trying to sell or evangelize. And what we see is that from top down, CTOs, CEOs, they want this. They're like, when's it ready? Let me have it. I want my team to play with it. Animators, they take a little bit more of a, is this really going to help me right now? The answer to that is purely one of quality. Because the top animator who's very efficient at their job will say, that didn't really help me do this faster without it. And someone that's not quite an animator, maybe an artist, a rigger, maybe a game dev that doesn't have animation chops, is like, holy crap, you just made me so much more powerful than I was before because I can do X, Y, Z that I could not have done before. So I think it's all relative to the user and where they are on that quality level. Now that's going to change significantly as we progress. I like to tell people that we're at a ChatGPT 3.0, ChatGPT 3.5 moment. But when Uthana gets to a ChatGPT 4.0 moment or a O3 model moment, how are you not going to use something like this? It's almost just like there's an inevitability that's coming. And whether it's Uthana or the next generative AI startup for 3D animation, you're going to see people change their workflow significantly. Quality gets to that level. Did I answer that question? You seem so unsatisfied.
I'm do you get any of the ethical concerns that folks have? Because your data set is a little different. I'm not sure if people are just like, oh, it says AI or it's generative AI, and therefore I have ethical concerns. Do you want to speak to that on your site?
For sure. We got that early on. I think people were a lot more concerned about that 2 years ago or even a year ago than they are now. It's not to say that the concern isn't warranted. The concern is warranted. But specifically for us, we train all our models on data that we have collected specifically for the purpose of AI training. We have our actors sign documents say, I'm okay with this motion being used in AI training. We don't harvest a bunch of data that's not intended for AI training. So we've checked the boxes on, are you allowed to use this data? And the answer is yes, because that's really the biggest ethical concern. I guess a secondary ethical concern might be like, am I putting people out of jobs or something like that? But like, that's not typically the concern we're hearing. Now, separate to that ethical concern thing, I think what I've seen in the industry is not just for animation, but for all AI. 2 years ago, I don't think we'd ever use that. 1 year ago, I think we might consider using that, but we're concerned about the ethics. Until like now, it's like, we're going to use it, but we just need to know exactly how. There's still a little bit of questioning, but man, it's a totally different tone than it was past. I'm curious what your personal tones are and how you think about it, not just animation.
We talked in a previous episode how from last year's GDC to this GDC, the tone has changed quite a bit, at least on the tool side. And I think a big part of that is like, because on the one hand, these tools are getting better and better. And on the other, the market is so rough.
Right. Pressure is so hard. Yeah.
Yeah. We need to deliver with fewer teammates, or we need to be much more cost effective. I'm going indie. This is the only way I can actually, continue to work on this field.
Yeah.
So I think there's an increasing reception. I think there's also more upfront acknowledgement of the ethical concerns. So I think we'll probably end up converging somewhere in the middle. Take a position that is less, open how do you call those mines that are open ground? Yes, whatever that is called, the open ground mining,
Open pit
face
mining,
There's a word for that are so bad for the
strip
environment.
mining.
Strip mining. That's what I'm
Yeah.
imagining. But it's still very useful. At least that's what I've been hearing here.
Yeah. Well, this is one reason I asked the earlier question is because I do feel like animation is a space where we've seen a lot of innovation years, right? Like there's just all sorts of things that we're doing to improve animation. And a lot of it is procedural or to enhance or improve the efficiency of artists. Maybe it's a different amplitude of what's happening now, but it doesn't feel quite the system shock to animation. We went from I can't generate a 2D image to suddenly I can generate a 2D image. Like that was felt like a bigger jump. I think the bigger question we get in terms of using the tools or not is often around the impact to jobs and our whether we need less people or we don't need any of those people. I think this is a more complicated answer, and in fact, I think we're always looking for ways to push the boundaries. I don't have to do the type of coding that my game developer forebears did back in, the 70s or 80s, like working on very early arcade systems or whatever. Like I have so much, even before generative AI, I had so much more powerful tools and languages. I don't have to write my whole engine from scratch. We could argue that it's not a zero-sum game. The industry has expanded.
Yeah.
The only challenge that I think we'll have is industry-wide around content saturation, regardless of how we're creating that content. I think the way we've sometimes also talk about that a little is really focusing on our application of generative AI and machine learning to unlock things we never really could do before. It's not that I'm replacing people. It's that like we still work with narrative artists or narrative writers and folks. It's not that I don't need them, but they could never do dynamic dialogue. They couldn't type back to everybody during gameplay. It's not a thing that could ever have been done.
Yeah.
Humans wouldn't have done it to begin with. We're doing something that is new and cannot be replicated by humans anyways. I think when we use the technology in those ways, it's generally more exciting because it's true innovation as opposed to just doing the things we always did, but faster. And I think to your point of like building a foundation that you're making now so that we can unlock stuff that's never been done before is very exciting.
I'll give one example where we have a job that will emerge as a result of AI that will probably borrow from today's jobs. If we imagine this future where the character can come to life in real time and every motion of that character is agentic, meaning we didn't pre-see that motion. I could preview that character in a web browser and interact with that character, get a feel for what it looks like. I could talk to that character from a language perspective. I could change the way the character looks. So I can do a lot with the character. And I imagine it's not going to be the CEO or even the producer doing that work. It's going to be some person that previously had the job of artist, animator, rigger, or even writer, if it's coming up with the character's ethos, that's going to create the character. They're going to be in charge of it. And the job of folks like us is exposing tools that let them interact with that AI and figure out what they want, because ultimately it's about taste and how does the character look and feel and act and react to the audience or the game player.
So here's pulling a quick 90-degree turn and forcing my game jam idea on this podcast.
Is that why Aaron was smirking? Was he expecting this to?
Earlier, you said that you have this motion capture, like you can use your motion and then you transfer that to Uthana. And you were talking now, like, you have your character that you can play and, you're editing, but you're speaking very much from the creator perspective. But I wonder, what would it take and how fun to make a dance teacher game where you actually dance, the characters are learning, and they go to the disco and the dance moves spread like a meme. So you're incentivized to do the coolest moves so that other people's characters are adopting that.
I love this game.
How feasible is it from a technological perspective?
Ooh. I'm literally thinking through how to do that. I think the biggest challenge in what you're describing is there would need to be some type of training step, potentially. Or maybe it's actually just as simple as you have a node that represents the model that understands dancing holistically and can do lots of different dancing, but isn't skewed one way or the other. These individual moves to its catalog, or maybe just add moves alongside the node. And the game basically says, okay, do the dancing, but every 10 seconds intersperse one of these moves that the player came up with. The AI model, which we already have technology for, could easily do the blend or the in between these different moves to make it cohesive and make it work. And then the characters just come into life in the game. I think the harder part of that is how do you then judge it? Who's judging it? Is it player judged? Is it AI judged? It's a definitely possible thing. I think the biggest thing is that first node of just dancing and not doing other stuff would need to be collaborated between the game developer and the AI company to make sure we have a base. But then the addition of nodes or different addition of like movements, like that's a very doable thing. That'd be a very fun game. I like it.
What, as we get to the close here, I'm curious, what are some of the particular challenges or hard limits? We talked about humanoids, like how do I get dogs, cats, birds, other things animated? It turns out there are all sorts of robots, weird things. Is cost an issue? What are some of the things that you see ahead that you're trying to tackle?
Yeah. So for us today, we do bipedal characters only. We are not trying to get out of bipedal characters, and mainly because when you get out of bipedal characters, you need a different training data set, and we haven't invested in that. And then you'd have to, of course, train new models as well. So quadruped has always been a thing that we've said, maybe we'll do that sometime, but we're going to have to have a lot more funding and or success with bipedals before we go there. Another thing is we've got data for hands. Some of our models are starting to think about using hands, but some of our base models, no hands or fingers, not hands, but fingers. It's just, if you can imagine, we think about it as a bone system. So when you add all these bones, it's just like taking a lot more compute. So that impacts cost and time. We don't do face today. The reason we don't do face yet is because that's a different domain as well. We have things like MetaHuman and other rig systems that bring characters to life from a facial perspective. So maybe that's an area we will eventually tackle. Beyond that, we try to make models that can be very lightweight to run. If you come into Uthana's app today, you can prompt unlimited. We don't cap you. When we think about a future financial model, when we come out of beta, we're thinking about it not as a cap on creation, but a cap on download. Play with it, use it, generate as much as you want, and then you'll be like rate limited. Think about the stuff you actually like and want to game. That's how the tool set today. It totally changes when we get into the API, SDK, or any.
That's awesome. One of the things that I'm taking away from this again, and it's not to take away from everything you're doing, but just again, like how complicated all of this can be, right? When people are like, oh, AI animate, like surely it's going to just solve it. It's just, we're talking all the work that you've done just to get like good humanoids, right? And like there's so many areas around this, so many other aspects. And while I'm really excited about what the future has, there's still a lot to be done. And it's going to like necessarily tomorrow, like we're going to AI up the whole animation stack, all the pieces and components of your tech art stack in day one. But we are moving quickly though, like to your point, it's advancing fast.
It's a journey. We look at large language models as an analogy, where today we're kind of amazed, and yet we still think there's so much more opportunity. 2.5 years ago is when we commercialized ChatGPT, had that commercialization moment. And even before that, there was years of development to get to that point. And so I think the development cycles are getting shorter across different domains because you can borrow learnings from these different ML areas. But it still takes time to get to that place where it's like, oh, this is obvious. Or, oh, I can use this in so many different ways. And I think we'll see that in all these ML domains. It's going to take time. And yet at the same time, what I thought was like 7 to 10 years is like 3 to 5. And so what else are we expect to happen in the next year?
Dancing games.
That's it. It's either the
remote. Can you go fundraise for that idea, please?
Yeah.
Get a boatload of capital for dancing games, and we'll make it happen.
The headline we're going to go with is either dancing games or you don't need Blender. It's one of those two. That's
You don't need Blender for dancing.
Well,
man,
it's been amazing to talk to you again. Before we wrap up, is there anything else that you want to share? How to direct people to what you're doing, or where to catch up with you or follow you next?
Yeah, Uthana.com is the place where you can go use the application, try it out, tell us what you like, tell us what you don't like. I'd love to hear it. Follow me on LinkedIn /Viren Tellis. I'm always posting about things, AI and animation. And I'm excited to interact with your audience. Look forward to it.
Awesome.
Viren, thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. It's been a lot of fun.
Everybody.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the full episode. We really hope you enjoyed the discussion. It would help us out a ton if you subscribed to the show on your platform of choice, as well as shared it with folks you think would find it useful. You can always check out playingwithinference.com to get in contact with us, join our Discord, or just find the links to the episodes. See you next week.